morning, welcome back to Erasmus TV. The corona crisis amplifies and deepens inequalities in our society. How does this work at the university? In a white paper, the Diversion and Inclusion Officers wrote about the different groups in academia who suffer mostly from the corona crisis. With me is Diversion and Inclusion Officer Semiha Denktaş. Very welcome.
Thank you.
Some people say that the corona crisis is a great equalizer. You're not one of those people. Can you elaborate on that?
No, I don't think it's the great equalizer, because I think the corona crisis disrupted all of our lives. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, everyone is affected in one way or another. I mean, when I look at myself, I'm now at home for almost 3 months, and I'm so happy to be in the studio this morning at the campus. So from my home, I can see the Mandeville building. So I'm going to be very happy when I'm back on campus. But when we see at the affects the distribution of the outcome of the corona crisis, we see a lot of inequalities. I mean, some groups are affected in a much larger way than others. So yes, everyone is affected by the corona crisis, but the distribution of the effects are not equal.
Yeah, and in the paper you identified some groups who suffer more than others. Can you give an example?
Yeah, so we looked at international literature and also talked to people in our own community. And what we see is that, for example, international students are affected much more. And you can imagine that when I talk to internationals, they speak about smaller networks that they can rely on. But also they're more anxious. If a crisis is at hand, you want to be close to those who are close to you, to your family, to your friends. And if you're abroad, you don't have this network. Or sometimes you have built a network, of course, but I can imagine that they feel more affected.
And are there groups even more suffering because of these problems? Are there groups overlapping?
Yeah, so again, to give you the example of being an international. For example, if you're an international academic, a female academic, and you also have little children. So the fact that you don't have a huge network to rely on top of that, having to take care of small children, for example, to provide homeschooling, means that you are double affected. So that's why we always try to look from an intersectional perspective. Sometimes you have multiple risk factors that may affect the outcome in a more adverse way. So we've seen it, for example, when there was an opportunity to apply for research grants, and it had to be done in a couple of days. So when you're taking care of small children or have other care tasks, it's almost impossible on top of writing a grant application when you have to do online education, do your other task, and also on top of that take care of your children.
And what does this mean for interventions to try to solve these inequalities?
So like I said, you have to use the intersectionality lens. So there are probably multiple risk factors at that moment in place. So if you only solve one aspect and you forget about other aspects, then still the problem is going to exist. So that's why when you do interventions, we have to listen to people. We have to talk to people and listen what the problems are and what we can do to address these problems.
Yes, and one of these groups are also PhDers. And a group of PhDers wrote to the university about their concerns and grievances about their position. Zoe Hamana is a PhD at Erasmus School of History, Culture and Communication, and he explains his position.
We are in a position of precarity, and this precarity position has only been amplified due to the current corona crisis. A lot of us, if not all of us, have been forced to either slow down or even completely stop. However, at the same time, the university is pushing a business as usual approach, in which is asking of us to continue even though we were forced to slow down or stop. And a lot of the courses that we were teaching were not designed for online education, and now all of a sudden we have to do it online, right? This meant that a lot of us had to put in more hours and more labor into making this as good as possible, or near as good as okay as possible, to continue the teaching. We are already in a stressful position as PhD candidates before the Corona crisis arrived. However, during the Corona crisis, this only got amplified and got even bigger and worse. We appreciate the university sending us messages of support, and that the university wants to be there for us. We also appreciate the song they made, but beyond the symbolic gestures, we actually need and want material gestures and material solutions, right?
What do you think of this position of PhDers, especially when you look now and some of them have contract renewals coming up, or, well, have to start getting hired, and people like to play it safe in these times. And we discussed already last week that, well, the university is quite wide. So what does this mean for, well, PhDers are already vulnerable, but perhaps some are extra vulnerable?
Yeah, I agree, and I hear what he's saying. I mean, yeah, I can appreciate the fact that they voice their concerns. I mean, I can relate to that. We talk to PhD students, and I think from the start of this crisis, I'm also the Vice Dean of Research of ESSB, so I've been strongly involved in how we address the issues that our PhD students have, and we also did that on university level. And I think there are a couple of issues related to this issue. So to start with, we need to acknowledge their concerns, to start with. We have to listen to their concerns. I see two parallel developments. On the one hand, we have PhD students who make full use of the time that they're at home to write papers, and they feel sort of comfortable as long as they can have social contacts through online meetings and have good contact with their supervisor. So that's one side of the coin. We hear that too. On the other hand, we hear voices like Zoe's. And so I think there are responsibilities on several levels. And that's what we also wrote in our white paper. I think there are some responsibilities on national level. As a university, we cannot solve problems like, let's say, we're going to give them an extra year on top of their current contract. That's difficult. That's something we need to solve on the level of the minister too. We have, I think, responsibility on university level, and that's something that we discuss amongst the research directors. We try to systematically see which problems exist and how we can intervene. So the deans, vice deans of research, department heads, management, leadership, they all have to take responsibility for taking care of PhDs. And then you have the level of the PhD and their supervisor. There is also a responsibility, and for the PhDs, it's their responsibility to voice their concerns, and they did. And on the side of the supervisors, most supervisors I know they already do, have to reach out to their PhD students on a more frequent level, just to check up on how are things going? Are you still okay? Not just content related, but also social and psychological related.
Yeah, but they would probably be most happy if they just got another contract. So the Minister of Education should just give the university the money to extend all contracts for PhDers by a year?
I agree. That
Yeah,
would be
that should be great.
that would be very good. And so I think there are multiple levels, but within our university, it's our responsibility to reach out to our PhD students, to listen to them, and to see how we can help.
Yes, and well, whilst you're here at the show, we're also, of course, following these worldwide protests. And I already adjusted that protests are against racial injustice are increasing. And we discussed it also here last week with some students and some employees of the universities. How do you feel about these protests as the diversity officer? And how are you looking at, the problems universities also facing?
It was so disturbing and painful to watch what happened. I mean, I still can't watch without becoming very emotional. I think it was so painful, and it was what happened in the US unleashed this pain and protest all over the world, also in the Netherlands and also in many of our cities. There are still demonstrations, and so within our university, I think one of the first things that we did is to show that there is a problem. We acknowledge that there is a problem. I think it took courage and leadership of our executive board to make that statement on our EOR website, to acknowledge that we have a problem and that we have to do better. So that's good, I think, to start thinking about these things. But it's not something that happened yesterday, and racism has been here for ages, also in the Netherlands, and it's now, I think, more out on the table than before. So also within university, we have to talk about racism, because I think words matter, but action needs to follow. I think we need to install policies and interventions to do better.
Definitely, you say it's painful to watch. Of course, if you're a black person or a person of color, that's your daily experience. You daily experience those pains and those troubles. And one of the things students of color and also black students have been saying is that they need more role models, more people to look up to within academia.
Absolutely.
The university has policy on hiring more women in academia. Shouldn't that be broader?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when I started in 2018, I think the focus was on gender diversity. And the first thing that I did with my team at the D&I office is broaden that. I think diversity and inclusion is not just about gender. It's about more than having more female academics. Don't get me wrong, it's an important aim that we're going to fulfill, but there is more to it. I think when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's also about ethnic and cultural diversity, religious diversity, sexual orientation, age, for example. There are many, many dimensions of diversity, and we should be addressing these too. When we talk about role models, I agree. When I started as a young student, I had no role models, and still I am now in this university, and I still see that we lack diversity in many, many aspects. And that's something we need to handle and tackle.
Is there a promise you can make? And then for the next 2 years, we're going to work on this kind of policy or something else you can promise students who are really, really hoping that they get those role models?
Yeah. So we've been working the last year on a new program. I'm going to keep this as some sort of a cliffhanger. Watch the news on Erasmus. Within this coming month, we're going to speak more about it. So we're definitely going to do something about this.
So if you want to keep updated on that, keep an eye out for Erasmus Magazine and of course for Erasmus TV. Thank you for watching, and we will be back here on Thursday.